This is John Reeves, and welcome to the Truth as Medicine podcast. We acknowledge that we gather in Kent, Washington, on the homelands of the Coast Salish peoples, including Duwamish and the Muckleshoot Indian tribe, whose ancestors and descendants have long cared for the Green Duwamish watershed. We honor their ongoing relationship with these lands and waters. We pay respect to the Coast Salish elders and relatives, past, present, and emerging, and we commit to learning from and acting in reciprocity with the Indigenous communities who steward this place. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Truth as Medicine podcast. This is your host, John Reeves, and I have with me today one of my favorite providers. He is an osteopathic physician, currently working for a tribal health program in Oregon. I'd love to introduce you all to Dr. Paul Vitt. Dr. Vitt, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, John. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you, a friend and colleague in the field.
And I always start these from a place of how each of us kind of remembers how we met, because I'm a full believer that a relationship, its origination has a deep impact on the purpose and the intention of their relationship throughout life if they end up being a lifelong friend. But as I remember our first meeting, and you may remember yours a little bit different, but I was working on the tribal health program there in Oregon. It was an expansion project, and we were currently going through the process of getting everything set up. And we got to the point in the project when we had to start recruiting providers, and we hit the ground. You were the only provider that we recruited and subsequently hired that walked right through the front door of the organization, right through the front door into the tribal office, and asked me by name, which I thought was amazing. That really speaks to your character and a lot of what we're going to talk about today. But that just resonated with me, and it stays to me to this day. From your perspective, do you remember the first day that we met?
I do, and it was really interesting because I was working in a community clinic in Southern Oregon on the coast. It was a 6-month contract, and the clinic was having such difficulties that the writing was on the wall that it was going to be closing shortly. So I was reaching out for another opportunity because I really love the Oregon coast. It's really beautiful and a unique place to practice. And I was given the name of John Reeves, and someone said, you're a Native American tribe in Coos Bay. So when I was calling, I thought that I was making contact with an established healthcare clinic, Indian healthcare clinic in Coos Bay. Yeah. And I called the number, and a very nice receptionist, really very pleasant young lady, answered and said, well, let me connect you to Mr. Reeves' administrative assistant. So she did, and I explained that I was interested in applying for a job. And she said, well, let me connect you to John Reeves. So as soon as I had my opening conversation with you, John, and this is the truth, I really felt that it was a brother of the spirit, that your energy and enthusiasm for what you were doing really kind of echoed or mirrored the way I kind of approach life. And that was the initial conversation. And I guess about a couple of days later, I drove up from Bandon to Coos Bay and had the opportunity to come in and meet the good ladies that connected me to you. And they were just so warm and welcoming. I thought, this may be a home. And then I had the pleasure of meeting you. And then I knew it was a home.
I remember that conversation dearly. I think my assistant at the time, she's like, oh, I know of this doctor. I've heard of him. Some of our tribal members actually see him in another organization, and brought you right back. And I think we must have talked for 3 hours or something, just sitting there in my office, just talking about our pasts and our experience in Indian country and with the tribal health programs all over the country. And we've kind of had a very interesting trajectory, which I find often because Indian country is such a small place. But we've worked at places up until this point, either before or after each other. But in this organization, the one in Coos Bay, was the first time that we got to actually meet each other. And it's been amazing. It's really been a wonderful friendship, and it'll be a lifelong relationship. I just can't say enough about you. So why don't you take us through, I'm interested in why you like to provide services in our community. Maybe start with your undergraduate and take me through your experience and how you ended up to where you are today.
Well, thank you, John. But I say ditto to everything that you said. It was just a coincidental that I was directed to you, but I guess it was meant to be.
I think so.
All right. But to start with my undergraduate uh, education and how I wound up more or less where I am today. I graduated from Temple University. It's a state university in Philadelphia. And I was a pre-med student there. And I had a real interest in social psychology and social philosophy. I took a course on the mind-body uh, dichotomy and explaining why the mind is more than just a physiologic functioning organ in the body, that they're maybe not identical to just the brain function itself. The professor of the course was pretty well known in philosophy, and he sent my paper to a professor in Syracuse University who also was a specialist in that area, mind-body philosophy. I went up and had an interview, and they enrolled me in their PhD program. I thought, whoa, I've had one philosophy course that was really a shock. But the day I graduated Temple, I can remember it distinctly, I lived in an area in Philadelphia where they had row homes, and I literally had my cap and gown in hand. I remember it so distinctly as though it were yesterday. As I approached my home, went up the steps to the doorway, on the screen door was a Western Union telegram. I had never got that. I thought, someone congratulated me. This is wonderful. Well, I opened it up really so excited to see who congratulated me. Now, this was in May of 1970, and it was the U.S. government telling me I had 30 days to enlist or be drafted,
Wow.
because my draft number, then we had a lottery system, and I guess it was one lottery that I won, because my number was in the numbers that were being drafted. So here I was, ready to begin a PhD program in philosophy, and kind of put the pre-medical thing aside because I really was interested in, I was going to solve a lot of the mysteries involved in philosophy at that point. That's how I guess a undergrad thinks at that point. So I went up to Syracuse, and a friend who I had met up there said, Paul, you have to try to get into a reserve unit. You only have, and at that point, I think it was like 20 days left or you're going to be drafted. So we drove all around Syracuse trying to find a reserve unit. And what happened is we found an infantry unit that was in downtown Syracuse, not too far from the university. And we went in, and they said, well, you're in luck. We have a few positions left, and you only have 6 days to either sign the paper or whatever they did at that time. It was 50 years ago. So I said, I'll take it. I guess dragged the story on too long, but I enlisted in a infantry unit in Syracuse, New York, a National Guard reserve unit. And about 2 months later, I and one other fellow from Syracuse departed on a snow-blowing day, even though it was in October, to Fort Polk, Louisiana. And we were dressed in wool jackets and I think back then corduroy pants, believe it or not. And we got off the plane that landed at Fort Polk, and all these Southern boys there were in T-shirts and shorts, and they were laughing. They were laughing their sides out at us. Here was these two kids from Syracuse that left when the snow was kind of blowing, and there they are in shorts and T-shirts. And being as welcoming as the armed services are, we stood there about an hour on the runway, probably 90-degree heat, in our warm winter clothes. But in short, it was probably the best 6 months education I think that matched any I had. I was so thankful I had that opportunity to serve, John, even though it was in an active role in an infantry unit. The camaraderie of the folks that I was with, and the physical conditioning I was in and so forth, it was just a wonderful experience. And I wouldn't trade those 6 months. I know it's a long story for
No,
getting around to it.
that's
So,
awesome. That's another parallel that we have because I was in the military for a while, and a lot of my management philosophy actually comes from what I observed and what I resisted against in the military. Because I was the worst soldier ever, but the guys I met still talk to this day.
you know, it was just such a good experience that at the time, all my buddies that graduated when I did had real high draft numbers, and they felt sorry for me. And by the time I left active duty, I felt sorry for them. I thought every youngster should have the opportunity of serving. There's just something about it that you can understand what I'm saying, and others who have been in there. It's just a good education. Well, after I was released from the active duty phase of the infantry, I went back to Syracuse. And at that point, I thought, do I really want to do a PhD in social philosophy? Because one of the jobs they had for me as paying for my education was to teach undergraduate philosophy courses. I said, this isn't going to work. This is not going to end well. I've had, I had one philosophy course in college and I wound up here. So I thought, what am I going to do? I can apply for med school and that's going to take some time. And one of my dear friends was in Philadelphia and he was getting a master's in counseling. And I thought, well, that kind of fits into the whole area that I was interested anyway. And I thought, well, maybe I could give it a try. And then even then, maybe go into either psychotherapy or psychiatry. And this was a dear friend from college called me and said, Paul, why don't you come down here and give it a try? And I did. And this was a friend I had since high school. So we went through high school together, college, and graduate school. The reason I bring that up, he just passed away last week of cancer.
I'm sorry.
But he did come out this past summer, and we had some great time. So I got the master's in counseling, and at that point, I thought, I really would like to use that pre-med degree or that education I had from my undergrad degree. So in the interim, I had injured my back on a camping trip, and one of my friends said, "Look, why don't you try this osteopathic position?" And I said, "Well, I don't even know what that is." I went, and he did some manipulative work on my back, and he sat and talked to me about the mechanics of what was causing my problems. I thought, wow, this is really pretty neat. So I explored it more and applied to the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine because I knew they did traditional medicine, but they also did manipulative work as well.
Now, I want to ask a question real quick because we have some healthcare leaders and maybe new healthcare leaders. What is the difference between a traditional medical doctor, an MD, and an OM, osteopathic practitioner?
I just looked this up recently, knowing that we'd had this discussion, and the origin of it actually began in Indian country.
Really?
Yes, a fellow by the name, well, it became Dr. Still, Andrew Still was his name, was born in Virginia, and his father was an MD physician, and he went out to the frontier land, and I don't know exactly where, to help the Native Americans. He practiced medicine there. So he took his young son, Andrew Still, with him, and I guess they spent, I think, I may be wrong on the exact numbers, but probably close to 10 years. And in the interim, Andrew Still got his MD degree, and the Civil War came along. And he served in the Civil War as a surgeon, I guess, and as a physician. And during that time, he saw that the musculoskeletal system and keeping it healthy was a lot more important than what it was attributed to be at that time. The medical philosophy at the time was, well, the only thing the musculoskeletal system really does is hold the organs in place and allow you to move around and have movement. And his philosophy was, and I really think that now that I even read that, how it really tied into how many of our tribal communities view health in general. And he said, no, there's more importance to that. If you keep the musculoskeletal system healthy or restore it, you're going to help the person's health in general and not just repair a broken leg or an amputee or whatever. And I thought that all the soldiers he must have treated with amputations and horrible wounds helped with that. And he also felt that, and this is where I feel it came probably from the Native American cultures. He felt that really health was more than just fixing diseases. Well, in the interim, he had lost 4 children. I don't know the causes of the disease. They died with the way medicine was being practiced at that time. We have to remember it was 150 years ago.
Right.
And he theorized that good health is a combination of both the mind, the body, and the spirit. And doesn't that resonate with the way many tribal communities feel about health in general?
It does. And that's kind of at the intersection that we're at right now is we have a lot of our indigenous and our tribal health programs that are trying to bring in these healing centers or that a mind, body, spirit, the holistic model. And I have told people for years, and they're going to hear me say this again, I really believe the way we provide care in Indian country is the key to unlocking all of the misalignments in the broader healthcare system.
John, that is right on key with what I was about to say. So what happened is that Andrew Still was advocating this view, and they said, no, you can't teach that. That's not the way our medical philosophy, or I guess you could call it a mantra, is at this point. We recognize the disease and we treat the disease. And he thought that health was more than just treating the disease, to treat the whole person. So a holistic view is what he really pontificated. Well, at that time, he wasn't making any inroads in the medical field, so he opened his own school, I think in 1780, something like that, in Kirksville, Missouri. And that was the beginning of it. And he developed some of those manipulative techniques that wasn't using medications to try to correct some of the musculoskeletal problems. So that was the beginning of it. We we did a couple 100 hours of learning to do different manipulative things to help the musculoskeletal system without using heavy medications to try to recover certain strains or other injuries to the body. Because in my training, your first 2 years are involving, as you probably are aware of it, the didactic sessions where you go to school from 8 in the morning until 5 at night every day for 2 years, and you learn the basic medical sciences. They want me to really reiterate all of them, but like anatomy and physiology and pathophysiology and pharmacology. And I was very lucky. The school I attended had recruited some of the top professors from the other 4 medical schools in the Philadelphia area. Philadelphia is really well endowed with medical personnel. It's where the first hospital of the country was founded by Ben Franklin, and the first children's hospital at the University of Penn. So those first 2 years really were pretty much identical, except for learning the osteopathic philosophy to a degree and their history, which I kind of reiterated some as I best remember it. And then your next 2 years are done in doing rotations in different hospitals or medical fields. And I did all MD training in my 3rd and 4th year in different hospitals and rotations. And then my residency, I did my internship in a pretty large teaching hospital in Delaware County, and then transferred to Hahnemann University, where family practice was a new field at that time. Because in the interim, I kind of became not very pleased with the way psychiatry was, because I did a few rotations in large psychiatric centers. And that was an experience. They were all locked doors, and these were people who were heavily medicated. And I thought, is this what I want to do for a lifetime? I thought I was going to be working with people. Probably it would have been better if I had done some rotations in individual psychiatrist offices. But doing the large institutions kind of sent me in a different direction. I thought that maybe family practice would be good. I'd get to treat the whole person and from all generations and so forth. I was accepted in the Hahnemann program, which is one of the early ones in family practice. And it was a great experience. But I thought more about doing internal medicine than perhaps doing deliveries in obstetrics and some of those types of things. I was more geared towards internal medicine.
That's exactly what we need. Sometimes when I'm talking to tribal health programs or somebody reaches out unfamiliar with the world in which we operate in, and a common question to me is, what kind of doctor should we be looking for? And I kind of define who you are. I say you need a doctor who has got a lot of years under their belt. I mean, you can still go after the ones that need loan repayment or the ones that we want to kind of groom for the future. But
Right.
a provider who has spent time in the trenches, who has been the only provider having to make a lot of decisions and see a lot of stuff coming through the door, which really rounds out that robust practice style. And, to your credit, I mean, you fit all of those criteria, but I have even heard some stories about you from other doctors who have said what Dr. Vitt has sent us from a notes perspective is leaps and bounds beyond what we normally get. I think you have even diagnosed some things that the specialists were still questioning.
What helped lead to that in this evolving story is I started moonlighting, working on the side when I was in my residency. And One of the places I did was in a suburban hospital in the Philadelphia area. It was a large hospital, a few hundred beds, and I worked the emergency room. And that exposure was great because I was introduced to a family physician who had his office in the hospital. And he was part of a big subspecialty group, and he was one of the few family physicians that was part of that organization in that group. And he invited me to join him. And what I loved about it is because my real love was doing internal medicine and taking care of really sick people. And here it was, an office in a big hospital. And we were so fortunate to be probably no more than 10 miles, probably a lot less, from four of the big medical universities in Philadelphia. So most of our staff was comprised of doctors from University of Penn and Hahnemann and Jefferson and Temple and so forth, and a little bit further south from Johns Hopkins. So there was such a great cadre of physicians there. I just was in love. I worked day and night because I just loved working in that type of educational environment. So I stayed for 25 years practicing a form of family medicine because we had so many good pediatricians and gynecologists that there really wasn't much need for me to do that, nor was it really even the state of care when you have some outstanding subspecialists in all those different areas. So that's how it deviated a little bit from family practice. But it was a great experience. It was like doing a 25-year residency because taking care of the hospital patients and having so many really good physicians down the hall or up a flight of stairs or down a flight of stairs or whatever to talk with on a daily basis. So that really set the stage for my basic medical experience. And after 25 years, environment medically in the Philadelphia area and in its surrounding suburbs was being inundated with health maintenance organizations. It was, I guess I could say it devastating to the private practice of medicine at that point. The corporate-owned medical systems at that time were buying up practices left and right. And if you didn't sell your practice, it was pretty hard to make a living because you had to join one of the HMOs to have an adequate population, even in an area like Philadelphia or its suburbs. So I, like all my colleagues, 95% of us sold our practices to one hospital or a corporation. My patients were disappointed because I wasn't able to give them the same type of care that I did when it was my practice and I owned it. So what happened at that point, I was unhappy and my patients were unhappy. I was looking for a different venue where I could practice the way I did for 20 some years. My wife, uh, Beth, saw a postcard come from a recruiter for a job in a small town south of Kansas City, a town of 3,000 people. And they wanted somebody with significant experience that could open up a federally sponsored family practice or a clinic that would incorporate a lot of the practices that a primary care family physician would do. So I thought, well, it may be an opportunity to get back to kind of like a private practice type of situation. So I flew out to Kansas City. The day I left Philly, it was snowing, and all the tulips that had been blooming were coming above the snow line, and it was quite a sight. We left there and landed in Kansas City. It was 70 degrees and sunny. Downtown Kansas City, Missouri is kind of a neat place. The next day, we drove south to this small town of 3,000. And the first place we stopped was the hotel where we were going to be staying. And I asked directions to the hospital. And the young lady at the desk said, well, you go down to the traffic light and turn right. I said, okay, which traffic light? And she started laughing. She said, you aren't from here, are you? Well, she could tell by my accent. And I said, no. She said, because there's only one traffic light in town. And all 900 square miles of Bates County only has one traffic light, and that's it. So I went to the hospital, and it was a critical access hospital, which limits it to 25 beds, I believe. And it was relatively new. And it had a big banner out there welcoming me to come and interview and so forth. And the people were so nice. So I thought, how could I lose? It was a good experience. I wound up staying for 8.5 years until the clinic was actually closed and bought up by a corporation.
It's interesting how those things start in one area of the country and then they kind of work their way west. You're right. Yeah. Reliving it.
Yes, and it was a real transition. I went from an area of 2.5 million people to an area of 3,000. The cattle outnumbered the people.
You
So
heard it.
anyway, lo and behold, Beth opens up another one of those, a recruiting letter. And it was from the Nez Perce tribe in Idaho. And I'd only ever been to Idaho one time in the southern part near their big city. And I really thought it was kind of neat. And what they were advertising for is someone with a great deal of medical experience who would be interested in being a medical director. So, this doesn't seem like such a bad idea. So, again, we traveled further west and were greeted by the tribal members with the Nez Perce and interviewed. And before I could attend the interview, there is, I guess it's part of the national park system. They have uh, a very nice educational building there right in the entrance, the western entrance of the Nez Perce reservation. And they had a big amphitheater there where you could view the history of the Nez Perce. So they said, why don't you go watch the films there? And they sent one of their young tribal members, a young lady. And when I saw what the Nez Perce had gone through, I wanted to shrink under the chairs, all that they had to go through to actually survive. That was the tribe that had as their patron leader, Chief Joseph, which there's a town of Chief Joseph there. They also was the tribe that bred and developed the Appaloosa horse, which they used for hunting. That was the Nez Perce who actually developed that because their hunting territory was all the way to Yellowstone National Park. And they still had rights to harvest the buffalo that left the park grounds and surrounded it. And they went all the way to the eastern mountain range of Oregon. So it was a beautiful, beautiful area along the Snake River and the Clearwater River. It's just a beautiful, beautiful area. And their reservation probably stretched for, miles and miles.
What year was that, Paul? What year was that?
That would have been, let's see, that would have been 2012, I think.
Okay. Did they have their new clinic and the Nimi Poo? Shout out to you all up in that area.
Yes, it was the Nimipu. Nimipu is what they call themselves. And Nimipu means the people. And it was such an eye-opening experience for me, John, especially being their medical director. We had over 122 to 128 employees. So it was just such a wonderful experience. Really learned so much about our Native American history by being there because I lived on the reservation for almost a year until I moved to a bigger housing unit off the reservation but close by. It was just such an experience that they had two clinics, the large one, which had dental and a full hospital-sized lab, big x-ray center, psychiatry, a whole gamut of medical people there. They also had a smaller clinic that was southeast of there in a town.
Is it Kamei? Is that the name?
Kamei, exactly, Kamei. And that was on the fringe of a massive wilderness area. I guess it's the Marshall Wilderness and the Bitterroot that goes all the way from there to Montana, I believe, to Missoula. It's hundreds, I guess, millions of acres of wilderness. So just such a beautiful area.
Did you see Bigfoot? Because I hear all the stories of Bigfoot when I was up there, and
No, but my size 13 shoes are hard to find in
they're like,
terms of,
Bigfoot's here.
I didn't see him, but there's all a lot of legends that he's there. I
Yeah,
was anxious to see him. I saw some big dudes, but it wasn't Bigfoot himself.
I love it. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm so glad you asked because it was such a good experience. And I really became more and more interested in our Native American history and their philosophy in what has allowed them to, through the generations, survive as a community and as a culture and a group. It was extremely rewarding. During that time, I was invited to attend, which I'm so appreciative of different ceremonies, from weddings to, I guess, well, even a funeral and different other ceremonial activities, which were really touching. And one of them that was particularly eye-opening and a wonderful experience was going to a sweat. I was really honored to do that. And it even inspired me more to learn more and more about their culture and the way they practice their culture and how that community feeling they had allowed them to survive from generation to generation through storytelling, through the elders and so forth. I stayed for a few years couple of years. And one of the requirements of being a medical director is I had to attend a meeting in Portland, Oregon. That's where the headquarters for the Northwest Indian Health Services was, in Portland, Oregon. And when I was there, I had a tour of the Oregon coast. And once I saw the Oregon coast, I thought, well, as much as I love being there at the Nez Perce, maybe I could find a tribal experience on the coast. So it was a very, very hard decision to make. So eventually an opportunity came up and I was recruited and took a position with the Siletz tribe.
I'm going to pause you there for a second. And before we
Yes.
leave Nez Perce, so we've got a little bit of an interesting thing here. So we're going to play a treasure hunt. For those of you that are up in Idaho and you may be listening to this from Nimipu land, the people go upstairs in that clinic. There's right where administration is, I think right up the stairs to the left. Walk right in. I think they still have some vending machines, and look on the wall. You're going to see a bunch of plaques, and you will see John Reeves' name as the hand games champion. I think it might have been 2013 or 2014. So whoever is able to locate that, take a picture and send it to me. I'll send you out something really special. But okay, I had to say that. And also, as we're transitioning over to the Pacific Northwest, a friend of mine, Candace, I know Candace, you work with Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. We were just talking to you the other day, Candace. Shout out to you and the great things that you folks are doing up there. Okay. Dr. Vitt, take us onward.
Well, great. It was really hard to leave all the friends I had there. I was just thinking of how dear those memories are now as I age even further, of the friendships I made with the tribal members and especially with the elders. Their lifelong memories and friendships. They're with the Nez Perce. They're such a proud and great people. It was just a real honor for me to have the opportunity to serve them. And that was my really introduction into working in Native American health clinics. I left with some remorse that I was probably leaving. The day I left, I was told I had to go to the big gym auditorium that they had there. It was a meeting, and I said, look, I got to finish up these charts. And they said, no, you must attend. I said, all right, I'll go over. Well, all the employees were there, and it was like, I don't know how many, probably close to 100 folks there. And they presented me with a blanket, which is an important symbol for for our Northwestern Native Americans. And I was just touched by it. It was really something special. And then I even felt worse about leaving.
Yeah.
But I went and then served with the Siletz and then subsequently over to Grand Ronde because they in proximity, had a relationship. And that offered even some different experiences that even endeared me more to working in our Native American facilities. Because the Grand Ronde tribe is a confederated tribe. There's several smaller tribes experienced the transition of moving from Southern Oregon and several different locations, tribes, and moved northward to where they are now in the Willamette Valley with a real hardship for the people. I don't know how many died in that transition of moving from the Southern Oregon coast. They weren't allowed to bring their traditional farming equipment or fishing equipment. It was a real eye-opening experience of what these people had gone through. But I really think that it built them a character that was passed on again through the elders from generation to generation of persistence and determination and bonding with each other. And it gives me goosebumps even as I say it, that they were so welcoming to me and incorporated me into so many of their tribal functions. Relationship between Siletz and Grand Ronde is a deep historic one. I don't know all the details about it, but they formed two different separate tribal entities back, I believe it was in the 1800s. And again, I could be wrong about that after the transition from relocating these dear folks from the southern part of the coast of Oregon to the Willamette Valley. But we used to have shared review of medical records and analyzing the quality of care between the two tribes. And they were in pretty good need of an additional physician at Grand Ronde. And it was a little bit larger organization. So that's when I was recruited and transitioned to there. And they have such an interesting history of their own that again, I think really bespeaks of the character of so many of our tribal communities, that they went through such hardships during their transition in the age from southern Oregon all along the coast and placed on a reservation in the Willamette Valley. In fact, I think when they were transitioned there, the forest that surrounded that reservation had been burned out. And what they have now is just phenomenal. And the lumber that they have cultivated, and uh, it's just amazing. And the story that I really, really love is that when they were trying to get recognized as a federal tribe, which is an important entity because then they'd be qualified for the federal benefits that are rightly coming to federally recognized tribes, like health care and other types of.
Education.
Exactly. And you could help me with that, John, knowing more about what a federally recognized tribe is entitled to.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And the world that we operate in, or I tend to operate in, is that tribal 638 space. And you guys have probably heard me reference it in a couple of these episodes already, but briefly, because I'm a man of many words, it's basically a government to government relationship. And going back to the treaties and the trust responsibility of the federal government, there's a handful of things that are embedded in those treaties that the federal government must provide care for. One of them being healthcare, education, and some other ones. So having that federal designation is really important in our tribal members, our relatives getting what's deserved from them for the years and years and continued mistreatment on behalf of the federal government.
One of the stories that I just love to hear from the elders who were experiencing it at that time in their efforts, the Grand Ronde, to be recognized as a federal tribe, and I believe it was they were told they better have a lawyer and have some funds to support a lawyer to represent them in the U.S. Congress to push forward and get that recognition. They started out with under $10 in their purse to obtain a lawyer. Even back in 1950s, you couldn't buy too much legal advice for $10, I suspect. So what the women of the tribe did, and others, I guess, of the elders too, is they opened up different stands for food and other handmade articles along the main road that traveled from Salem, Oregon, to the coast, like Lincoln City, which is one of the larger cities there on the coast. They raised so much money that they were able to obtain legal representation and subsequently got recognized by the government as a federal tribe. I think that speaks to the type of character that so many of our tribal members have imbued in their nature from hardship. And without having had the hardships they had, I'm not sure that they would have had that stamina and insight to do those types of things. Does that make sense?
It does. And I've got to give a shout out to one of my close friends, Ashley, whose mom has been on council for Grand Ronde. She works in Indian country, and I met her out in South Dakota. But yeah, she's a Grand Ronde tribal member, currently working with health services out of Portland there. So shout out to you, Ashley. Awesome work if your family was involved in that. But I agree with you. It does speak to the stick-to-itiveness and the, at all cost approach that a lot of our relatives have.
It seems like a small thing, but it's a huge thing because it has been passed on from generation to generation, that type of attitude. Yes, we can do it. We can make this work. And their dependence on one another and their importance of the family and of helping each other. It's just amazing because one of the things I learned so much from is that at the Grand Ronde Tribe, they have that wonderful casino there, Spirit Mountain. And the elders, since I was of elder age, I was not a elder of the tribe, welcomed into them, would have a dinner every Monday night that was provided by the tribe that they could attend and bring a guest. Well, there were many, many Monday nights that we would start out at 6 and stay until 9:30 when they were closing. Those restaurants where we would sit and talk and laugh and just enjoy so many stories that they were able to relay to me. And we would walk down the halls in one of the areas of the casino where their grandparents and great grandparents' pictures were. And they would tell me stories, and they were so enlightening. And we just had such great times that I still stay in contact with quite a few of the elders from those dinner meetings and from when I was at Grand Ronde. I stayed there for 5 years until COVID came. And then, due to some of my own health issues, I left. But there were a few other instances that I think that are maybe worth relating as to how I was welcomed into their tribal community. Uh, After my cancer surgery, 6 months later, I had to have open heart surgery up in the Portland area, in Beaverton. And right before my heart surgery, which was going to be done today, I went in on Christmas Day, and it was done on December 26th. And uh, 2017, the tribe arranged for a sacred tobacco ceremony. It was in their longhouse, and it's pretty hard to describe how really impressive it is if you are blessed with having that experience. What made it so neat is I was the only non-tribal member ever in their history to be honored with a sacred tobacco ceremony that they have in their known history. So that is near and dear to me. It was such an honor to be again to have them do that for me, and the prayers that they offered, and the significance it has in their culture meant so much to me. It's hard to kind of describe it, and anyone who has experienced it or been to one would understand.
That's amazing.
It was really amazing, and to this day, it still touches me. And one of the other things that I took from Grand Ron, besides the friendships that I maintain, is that the young adults and the youth contributed to buying me a tribal blanket and wrap me in the blanket as ceremonially, even after I left, several months after I left, and the COVID scare was over, and they did it at the casino, and people were wondering what we were doing. But it was such a touching experience, too, that they did that for me. They were memories that will last a lifetime.
Can you talk a little bit about how you feel after the ceremony?
Well, it was unbelievable, John, because I felt a sense of peace. Their prayers to the Creator, which I didn't understand their language, but it was done with such sincerity and such a deep meaning. In fact, several of the people were in tears, including my wife, who was invited to be there. They were actually crying because of how every aspect of the ceremony was so meaningful that even if one didn't understand the language, the meaning with which it was carried out had touched me forever. And I went into that surgery a week or so later with even more confidence and a sense of peace and resolve that comes from such an experience like that.
That's really, really special. Did you go back and treat patients at Grand Ronde after you recovered?
I did for a few years thereafter, and it made our Monday night dinners even more meaningful. Many of those elders weren't at that ceremony. Many of the non-tribal members working at the clinic wanted to attend, but as they said, this is a very sacred event, so it was limited. And I'm glad it was, because it even added more meaning to it. But yes, I did go back, and I worked up until the COVID epidemic before the vaccines came out, and the other doctors were actively treating acute COVID patients, and I didn't think it was fair that I would be excluded. Both my oncologist and my heart surgeon said, "Paul, you can't do it. I mean, you're still on some medicine for cancer and so forth that would really put you in harm's way with COVID." So I thought the best thing to do was to resign. I did some telehealth for a while, but that was in its infancy, and it isn't as sophisticated in the equipment and the technology that we have today for doing telehealth through the computer screen, because I'd always been a hands-on physician. Well, at that point, I thought, well, we have the vaccine, and COVID was kind of winding down, and I was contacted by some locums organizations, and one of them was in the area where we were living in the Salem area, and they said there's an opportunity to work in the women's prison system, the state system in Wilsonville. They said it's a 3-month assignment. I said, boy, I really have to think about that. There was like 1,400 inmates. And I've never done anything like that. They said, well, it's with your experience, we think that you could contribute and give it a try. You have to do it for 3 months or they will not hire you on as a contractor. I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. The clientele were mostly folks in their late 20s and 30s and some older, and most were there because of drug-related incidents. The experience was so touching, John, that those young people, I mean, a lot younger than me, were so appreciative of someone to listen and not judge them that I stayed for 18 months until they had a full complement of their own people who had been out due to one illness or COVID or whatever, that I had tears in my eyes when I left. I stayed 18 months, and it was that great of an experience.
You know, I'm glad you bring that up because I have often thought it would be interesting to work at a prison system because I see those jobs pop up or they're looking for contractors. But, you know, I'm a little apprehensive. So it was really a good experience for you.
It was even better than a good experience because treating these young folks, you could see the tough lives that many of them had. And it's not excusing whatever they were incarcerated for, but most of them were drug related. I often thought, and one of the psychiatrists that I worked with, he was a forensic psychiatrist that also counseled with these young people. And he'd say to me, we'd have lunch several times, Paul, if we had been in their circumstances growing up and some of the lives that these young people had, we may have been in the same predicament as that they wound up in. And they were just so appreciative of the medical care and someone to listen to them and administer medical care without being judgmental was another really heartwarming experience. That was another road that I had never anticipated taking that turned out to be a real blessing for me.
It really speaks to the genuine nature of yourself as an individual. Because I can imagine that some of those inmates, this was probably the first time that they've ever received any kind of tangible health care in their life.
And well, that's kind of you to say, but many did express that. And unfortunately, many had experienced some medical care where maybe they were judged, but I think you can understand that it was really an experience. In fact, if you wanted to write letters to the governor to keep me, I said, please don't do that. That will not look good. uh, that I said, thank you. I really appreciate it, but probably not a great idea.
I love it.
That after I did that, I then did they had a full complement of their own people returning. Then I did a 6-month stint at the male prison near Hermiston. That was a little bit more trying, to be honest. Then it was a good experience. So many of those folks there really appreciated someone who was willing to look at them in non-judgmental eyes. I knew it wasn't parking tickets
Right.
that weren't paid, but I never looked up why they were there and just tried to treat them as with the medical science that we had. And I'd have to say that the people that were there working in both of those prisons, the nurses and the other medical technicians and all, had that same attitude. It was just an eye-opening experience. But what an important part that the officers who attended those units there, they were like extended family members. There's so many of those people, especially like in the women's prison. They really had their best care in mind and serviced it. It was just a wonderful experience. It would be like I said, going to the military during the Vietnam era was a wonderful blessing, even though the one wasn't I anticipated.
Right. It's
So
interesting how those things shape our livelihood. And
after that 6 month stint, I thought that actually I was even going to stay. The nurses wrote a letter to the director at the time that they wanted me to stay not as a contractor, but as an employee, which I thought was really kind of nice of them to do that. But I didn't get my notice that, yes, that would be okay until 2 weeks before my contract was up. So in the interim, again, using that one of the locums contracting companies, there was an opportunity to return to the coast in the Bandon area. And for those who aren't familiar with Bandon, it's a beautiful coastal area and one of the top golf courses in the country, in the top 10, ranked probably right behind Pebble Beach for those that are open to the public to play there, is Bandon Dunes. I was just a mile and a half from the entrance and never played once, even though I had been an avid golfer 35 years before we had children. So it was a beautiful area, and I worked there for 6 months until the clinic. And
that's when
that's
we
when
joined
John
forces.
Reeves, That's when John Reeves and his dear wife Pui came into my life.
I love it. So let's pick up from there because that was a really interesting project. And for context, and for those of you that don't know myself nor Dr. Vitt from anybody else out there, we were working with a tribe that had only a dental center for 20 years, or a dental program, not really a center. And the tribe reached out to myself and my company asking if we could help them expand health system or their health system. And it was at that time, right on the tail end of COVID, when all that money was flying to tribes, and tribes for the first time, a lot of the smaller ones really had an opportunity to do something amazing in healthcare. Fast forward, Dr. Vitt was part of the team that we put together in the expansion from that dental practice into a full service FQHC lookalike, including behavioral health, medical, dental, and then kind of that holistic model. So Dr. Vitt, let's pick up from there and let's talk about how that clinic was put together. Like those early days of you and the nurse practitioner. You guys were sitting in, working on the policies in the boardroom right before the clinic was opening, and then that transition to the clinic and hiring all the staff. I'm interested from your perspective how that went or what that was like.
Well, it was really, again, another great experience I had, John, because having to see someone who had the vision to how to organize from ground up a medical clinic with all the complexity of all the different issues and certifications and paperwork that had to be done, working with you and seeing how you orchestrated things was really a great experience. And I'm not just saying that very marginally. I really mean it, John, because both Vanessa and I, who is a nurse practitioner, and I were able to sit down from the ground up and build policies using what is the standard of care and to the highest level in different areas of medicine to be able to write into policies that would be implemented in the practice there at the clinic, and hiring the type of people that would really look at it being an honor to serve in a tribal community and implement those types of practices and guidelines that are the standard of care today in medicine. So it was another really, really rewarding experience to have done that and to have the opportunity to be part of something from the ground up.
Yeah. And I have a little story from that time is once Paul and Vanessa had started and we were doing that ground laying work, Dr. Vitt would come in with a stack of printed best practice for each situation. I think you even had a binder. Did you not have a binder?
And we did. We did.
I loved it. And if you haven't picked up on our conversation thus far about the type of provider Dr. Vitt is, I mean, this just speaks to his experience, his understanding, and his wanting to bring what is industry best practice into our world in Indian country. So I just can't thank you enough for that, because it was really eye-opening to myself and also Pui. I can remember Pui being in there and saying, oh my God, this is probably the smartest doctor I think I've ever met.
John, you're going to give me a big head, but it was my pleasure because I really loved what I was doing. And it was like giving me an opportunity to really even grow more as a practitioner, to be able to implement and have the green light to implement some of the best practices that we know of and I have learned and had the opportunity of seeing when I worked in a big center in Philly. Then the cultural experiences that you can't read in a book or a journal article that I had with the Nez Perce and Celeste and Grand Ronde that still to this day influence how I practice and the people I have met. So, John, it was just a wonderful, and I'm saying that sincerely, not just to add this on, to work with you and to share your visions of how you wanted to really even make it grow further with incorporating behavioral health, which was so near and dear to you, as you can imagine from when I started on that road with counseling and was thinking about becoming a psychiatrist. And sometimes I wish I had done that. I'd probably be retired.
Well, in many ways, that's the way that the industry is transitioning. Like all of those mental health things are weaving back into the forefront. The ball field that you're playing on right now, to use a baseball reference, because I know you're a baseball guy.
I love baseball, yes.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of that policy work or maybe an experience in that clinic that really touched you or that, kind of speaks out?
Yes, and John, you were insightful to hire the behavioral health team, starting with a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and we had a psychiatrist as part of the initial team, and the other counseling folks and social workers. And it was so nice to have the availability, and still to this day, where they were in one part of the building, and the medical practice was in the other part, where every day I would go over or every day to this day, and incorporate them into helping our folks, because it goes back to that holistic approach that we're more than just treating a disease of hypertension or diabetes or heart failure or coronary disease. We're treating people, and the incorporation of their mental health, not because they have mental diseases, but the wholeness of helping them deal with the anxieties and the stresses of dealing with the medical complexity that they have to deal with. It's been just a tremendous experience. I quite honestly never had that to that degree until the clinic that we're working in now, to be able to have that access to hands-on and warm handoff of the patient to a mental health worker, and the patients appreciate it. Because so many had a negative stigma that, gee, you're sending me to a mental health person. Do you think I'm crazy?
Right.
And I would explain to them, no, this is just part of your general health. I know that this diagnosis is stressful to you and your family. How about if we have someone that can help listen to you and explore your feelings? And it's been tremendous.
I love it. I really, that's the model that I choose to build right now for that very reason, because a lot of us don't really understand that a lot of those manifestations of our illness or injury are coming from misalignments and on the behavioral health side. It's everything, our environment and how we were raised or how we grew up, or those things that we deal with on a daily basis. That's why social determinants of health are such a big thing. Coming from a provider, that really warms my heart to hear that that type of model is beneficial and not an unnecessary step in what is a really laborious healthcare process.
Honestly, that was one of the things that helped me choose to go in a direction with working with you in that, because from the very beginning, I had that very interest in the mental health side of things, knowing that it was more than just lip service to, yes, we're going to get you some counseling that's going to make you feel better, but that is such an integral part of one's whole health picture. The medical science has now really incorporated that idea. One's mental attitude and their thinking processes about their health is an integral part of their total health care, the whole person. And that's what really even inspired me more to work with you at trying to develop the clinic that we have here now.
Love it. Let's say you and I, we go and start our own practice from scratch. How should we build it? If we were to build the perfect system for our Indigenous patients and communities, what would that system look like?
Well, it certainly would have to include like the gamut of, like we said, both the medical science, the standard medical care, but to incorporate the tribal culture in a sense that, not that that would dictate how we practice medicine, but letting them know in a truly genuine way that we appreciate what they have experienced as a culture and as a people. And that can be done in lots of different ways without even, some of it doesn't have to be spoken in words, but just genuinely conveyed. Um, and that would have to be part of it as well. And then incorporating behavioral health, having the availability for laboratory services, having the ability for some educational within the whole clinic network, where it would reach out to the community and talk about the best practices for maintaining health, like dietary measures and the other types of things like exercise, and incorporating that into our clinic as well. Having dental services and all those other group practices that are part of today's medical world.
I love it. It's interesting because a lot of people, I'll talk to like state representatives or people that are part of the state Medicaid programs, their directors, and oftentimes they say to me, "You are only creating that type of system, John, that takes a patient, that gives them a dental visit, gives them a medical visit, gives them a behavioral health warm handoff in order to generate more revenue." And my argument back to them is, look, we are treating people oftentimes in very remote areas, and even with some of the same remote problems in the urban setting. But
Exactly.
we deal with those issues of transportation, food and sovereignty. So when we get our people in front of us in the clinic, we want to make sure that we are connecting as much as possible. And now in the world with community health workers, we can track them both inside the system and outside our four walls as they go to specialists or as they go to the hospital and come back to us. So that type of approach is, I mean, rates money because of the economics involved, but that's the right way to treat our people. That's it.
John, you summarized it really well. And I don't think the average person living outside of a, like, say, a rural or tribal community realizes how hard it is to be able to connect all those dots of the coordination of getting people to subspecialty clinics and the availability for dental care or mental health or those types of services, especially if they live in a larger urban area, but even they have trouble today. And having that service where they all can be connected to it, I can't tell you how many people over the 9 years now I've worked with Native American clinics, how many people have expressed appreciation for that. Wow, I didn't know that this could even be done.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's from as far as I'm concerned, that's the way to do business. Switch gears just a little bit, but kind of stay in the same ballpark. For a non-Indigenous provider like yourself, the yous and I's who want to show up well in Indigenous spaces, what are the first things that they should be prepared to learn? So somebody that's like you or me, because I'm sure there's a whole bunch of them out there, and hopefully we can find them. But they just don't have the experience, so they haven't broken into, or they didn't know until now that this was a space that they want to provide care. What are those things? What kind of advice would you give to somebody just starting or who wants to start as an outsider?
That is a great question, John, and one that is somewhat difficult to answer, but I believe that they genuinely want to welcome people as people, whether where they are, whether it's in a prison or uh, a urban community or in a tribal community. People are people, and they can sense genuineness. At least that's what several of the tribal members said. I said, "Well, gee, thank you for being so nice." They say, "Doc, it's nice to feel the genuine concern you have." So I think the one primary goal, you can learn the rest of that, different techniques that different cultures have. But if you genuinely want to help people as a person, that has to be the starting point. It's not just a job, it's a calling, I say, that you want to really be part of a community where you can make a difference in persons' lives, young or old.
That really resonates. I think it even goes to, oftentimes you have that old saying or something to the effect of, you can't train a personality. You can train skill sets, but you can't train
Right.
somebody's approach. And as long as you have the right approach, everything else will fall into place 9 times out of 10.
I think having that feeling of respect for people in general. And again, I can't emphasize that enough that it's not just a job. You're connecting with folks that you can make a difference in their lives. And in turn, as a gift, they make a difference in your life from their own felt appreciation that you weren't seeking to obtain, but that resulted from genuinely interacting with people and feeling their needs at that time and listening to them and respecting their life experiences and the hardships that they went through, not only as all of us do as individuals, but as a culture. There's hardly a day that goes by that I don't learn something new. But so often what our tribal folks as a culture have gone through. And the other thing that I think that has to really be stressed, I know this is deviating from the question a little bit,
Deviate
but
away.
it's one thing I think that's really important that has really greatly influenced my view is the tribal members' respect for the earth and the environment, not as a science, but it is scientific in a way, but their respect from the smallest creature to the very largest creature, from one plant to the biggest forests. And it's not like it's just lip service. It's a feeling you get when you really get to know the folks and live in the community, that their respect for the earth. And you just wish that it could be conveyed to, I guess, yes, to everybody. It would be a little bit different world.
Yeah. Facebook would be a different battleground if everybody understood that, wouldn't it?
It would. And not that they don't, every community have its problems, but that general respect for people in general and their community and their experiences and their generational, I hate to say trauma, but experiences, we'll call it, how that has influenced them today and how to respect each other and the friendship and feelings that they convey to each other. And they were so gracious in incorporating me in so many of those that really made me feel at home. In the communities. And that's something that I would tell young folks that are going to enter into this community, enter it with a genuine heart of wanting to understand, and people are people, and just being genuinely interested in wanting to help them. And the reward you get is so much greater than what you give them, that you really feel it was a privilege to have been able to work in the communities like that, as opposed to the other way around. It's a privilege that they have you. I've never felt that way. So that would be one of the opening things.
How do you
Yes.
imagine healthcare in the Indigenous space in the next 10 to 15 years from now? What do you see?
Well, I think that the availability of resources through a greater understanding of what our tribal communities need is more in the forefront now than it was. And doing the types of things that you did, like setting up this ground up organization, is going to be needed more and more for our tribal communities. AI is going to be a part of the indigenous tribal communities as much, I think, in their medical care as anywhere else in the country, because it really isn't separated from what the medical world is doing outside. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't make referrals to the hospitals in Eugene or elsewhere, because that's the nearest large hospital center we have. It's just going to be incorporated more and more into the greater medical world than maybe it has been in the past. That it's not really as much a separate entity, but by incorporating as much as we can in our tribal communities, like you designed or envisioned, with like the behavioral health and the dentistry and the pharmacy and the labs and all those things in the medical providers, and then reaching out to the community in general. I think that will involve more telehealth, where we can have contracts with different specialties, where we can have our folks, our community folks, have a telehealth visit with a specialist in OHSU or in Portland in the medical school there. And you and I had several conversations how we wanted to contract with them so that we, instead of waiting 6 months to see a rheumatologist, that we would have shared time on a weekly or monthly basis for an hour or two, where we could communicate our patient's needs to the specialist, and then have the patient with a telehealth meeting with the specialist, that they won't have to travel 4 hours from Coos Bay to Portland. And I think that's going to become a greater and greater part of our day-to-day practice, because now to do it in person, it's months and months wait. To see a neurologist in this area is somewhere between 6 months to 12 months. To try to shorten that span. And that, I kind of had an interest in that. And we were working with the VA centers when I was with the Perce, and people on dialysis and so forth, that we're in the process of incorporating dialysis units that our veterans didn't have to travel to for 2 hours to a dialysis center from Lewiston area, or the reservation with the Nez Perce and Lapway and so forth.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. You just gave me an idea for another episode with you in the future. But I think AI is going to make it all possible. It's going to make that
Yes,
coordination.
yes.
It's going to make everything. It's going to create seams when now there's fragmentation. So it's a really exciting time to be in healthcare. And our Indigenous organizations are right on the forefront of that. They have the opportunity, the possibility to make it all happen.
And you know, John, what's so exciting is that so many of both those who are in leadership roles in the indigenous communities, at least that I've worked, are really embracing this idea. They're leading the forefront. They could actually be lecturing the community in general on how to incorporate these newer approaches, which I'm sure they are in many urban centers and so forth, but they're so welcoming of this type of new avenues to approach in the delivery of medical care that it's exciting.
It is. I mean, we don't have in our world, we're not big organizations, so we're very nimble. And our nimbleness is going to be to our benefit in our ability to adapt these things and really create the framework, because the industry is going to come, but they're going to come kicking and screaming. And because of that, we're going to be on the forefront and driving a lot of this change. And that's why another reason why I say the world in which we operate right now in Indigenous healthcare is going to be the key to the broader industry and how we create care for everyone, not just Indigenous patients. Well, Paul, it has been a delight to talk to you and to learn a little bit more about you. Thank you for your perspective and your experience and in telling us what it's like to be a provider serving Indian country and even, other environments. I really appreciate your time.
I just really appreciated this opportunity, John, but I enjoyed it. And I truly and honestly feel that what you offer in Pui to build these tribal communities, I can tell you from having experience with the folks, as well as those that were already established, is truly, truly appreciated by the folks themselves. But thank you both.
We'll see you on another episode, Dr. Vitt. You have a good one. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Truth as Medicine. Be sure to join us for new episodes dropping about as often as I can interview people. The work has been really interesting and exciting with all the wonderful things that we have going on. But I'll keep interviewing people if you'll keep listening. If you have comments, questions, or guest recommendations, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out anytime at truth@indigenous.health. Until next time, thank you for listening and walking this path of healing and truth with us.